Now we move on from Belinda, and as she mentioned previously, we've got Michael Smith from Northumbria University. So he'll be presenting use on the behavioural science model to investigate end-use barriers and facilitators to mine water district heating. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you very much for Belinda for setting the scene so nicely for my talk. So as Belinda mentioned, we've been supporting Gateshead Council with some of their community engagement work around the expansion of their district heat network. And I'm sure that there's few people in here that I need to convince about the importance of community engagement. So from things like awareness raising to agency, making residents feel empowered, making them trust the energy transition that they're encountering, and acceptance and adoption of the new technology. Really, community engagement is essential for ensuring all of these things. In a very recent UK Parliament briefing, they referred to 3 different types of energy transition community engagement. So they talked about top-down engagement, which is more one-way, institution-led. Think about things like information campaigns, where information is being given to people. And then invited, which is more of a two-way collaborative type approach, where you might run things like focus groups with residents to get their feedback. And then to bottom up, so more community-led things like community energy schemes, which is really led by the residents. So 3 different approaches. All approaches are really important. And this paper that came out a couple of years ago spoke specifically about the case of mine water geothermal and talked about the importance really of combining these approaches and moving from this kind of doing to, which is more about informing people, up to kind of doing for, which is this consultation piece, surveys, focus groups, up to doing with, which is actually working with the residents to think about, well, how can we design this scheme with their input to best suit their needs? So in relation to the work that we've done to support Gateshead, we wanted to use the COM-B model, which is a behavioural science model. And it really talks about, if you want to shape people's behaviour, there are 3 kind of drivers to doing that. So capability, which is in this context, things like knowledge and understanding. Opportunity, which is making sure that people have the right resources in place to make a change and adopt a new technology. So these could be social, things like social support, could be things like physical resources that are made available to people. And then motivation, because we know that people won't be engaged in a behaviour, they won't want to engage in a new behaviour if they're not motivated to do so. And when we know these things, when we know what these kind of drivers of behaviour are, we can think about how we can intervene, what interventions we can put in place, and we can think about how to shape our policies around these kind of drivers to maximise the likelihood that behaviour change will occur. Okay, and it's not really novel to use this kind of approach in the context of a district heating scheme. So a paper published a couple of years ago focused on a Dutch study which used this model and found that motivation was the really key component of this model that drove behaviour. So people really needed to be motivated to want to connect to the heat network in order for that behaviour change to take place. And what we wanted to do was expand this by really kind of trying to pick up on what are these key motivations for people, what kind of capability factors do they need, and what kind of opportunities can be put in place to maximise the likelihood of acceptance and adoption. So Belinda has already helpfully mentioned the Old Fold expansion in the low-rise retrofit in Gateshead, which was the project that we specifically came on board to work with. Belinda mentioned that we don't think that low-rise retrofit has been attempted at this kind of scale in the UK previously. And this particular community is predominantly social housing. As Belinda mentioned, there's quite high levels of poverty. And there was also the opportunity here to infill private homes. So in this first phase, there was one private home that could be connected as well. So it was really about thinking about how can we really engage these people to maximise the likelihood that they'll have buy-in, they'll have acceptance, and they'll want to adopt this technology. So this is how we went about the about the study. So this is, we've published this in Energy Research and Social Science and just recently, and I'll pop a QR code up in a bit so that you can have a look at the paper if you want, with all the nice contextual information in. So the first phase, what we did was we did a survey where we surveyed homeowners, privately rented residents, social housing residents on the estate, to really try and understand what these underpinning factors were in relation to this COM-B model. And what we then did, so this gave us a really surface level understanding of what people kind of wanted, what their enablers were, what their barriers were. And then we were able to unpick this further by running a series of interviews and focus groups with homeowners, residents, private landlords as well, and social housing residents, to really try and get a good flavour of how we could really try and work with these people to harness their enablers and deal with and kind of address some of their barriers. So I'll quickly show you what some of the findings were. This is some of the survey findings. And one of the questions we asked was about information seeking. We wanted to know, how do people want to actually access information about this new scheme that they're being connected to? And what we found was that these opportunity factors were really key. So people really wanted really high quality resources that they could draw on, and they wanted some social support. They wanted face-to-face contact. They wanted to speak to people who might have had experience at connecting. They wanted to speak to people from the council. They wanted to speak to the contractors to really have that really close or that one-to-one communication about how their needs could be met. And in terms of whether they'd be intending to switch or not, again, we found this social support really. People wanted to have conversations. They wanted to really have that opportunity to have that face-to-face contact. And also just that kind of general level of motivation that this is a good thing. So we wanted to really tap into what are these motivational factors. So that's where the focus groups and interviews came on board. We came up with this really complex thematic map, which was where we analysed all of the focus group and interview data. And we came up with this quite complex map, but if you want to really tip into this, there's the QR code there for the paper, which I'll also show on the next slide. But for the purposes of this talk, I've really tried to simplify this and distill this down to what the really key messages were. So firstly, the residents indicated that they had really poor knowledge and awareness. They were really aware of this, and they really felt like they wanted to know more. As Belinda said, they were really enthusiastic about knowing more and trying to understand more. They also wanted high quality resources. They wanted that face-to-face communication. Okay. And then in terms of their motivation factors, there were three really key things. So firstly, the net zero message just really didn't resonate with them. Okay. They really, in terms of kind of global net zero, in terms of energy security, these were concepts that just, they weren't messages that really resonated with this community. What they were more concerned about was local emissions and local air quality. Okay, so this is something that we sort of suggested to Gates that would be really important to embed into any of the messages that are going forward, because this was something that resonated with people. They understood that sustainable energy is really important. So that was something that they understood, but they said we wouldn't want to pay more for that. Okay, so they wanted their energy bills to be at least maintained at their current levels, or ideally be cheaper. So we kind of had a discussion with Gateshead about, well, how can we kind of get this message across about what the benefits might be around the cost of adopting these kinds of systems. And as Belinda mentioned, the mining heritage was one that really struck people. So a lot of these residents had generations past who had worked in the mines, and that mining heritage was something they were really proud of. However, they had also often been adversely affected by mine closures in this community. So, it was really about kind of telling a story around this and letting people tell their story. Okay. And we kind of communicated all of this with Gateshead, and Gateshead did a brilliant job, as Belinda mentioned, at using this information to really communicate with people in the right kinds of ways, to try and get the messages out there, to have these conversations with people, frame the messages in ways that they could understand them and give them the right level of knowledge and understanding. Okay, but really what I've described here, this really is this middle bit, it's the doing for. And what we kind of felt like was we really wanted to sort of shift this up a gear and do more sort of doing with work, where we really got residents involved. So Belinda mentioned the Citizen Advisory Board, which took place run by Involve, which was a really impactful way of doing this. But in addition, what we really felt was needed was that the customer journey could be enhanced with really strong input from residents. So we're currently undertaking an approach where we're working with residents ourselves, with the council and the energy company, and with a contractor to really think about how this customer journey and how this messaging can really be optimized in a way that supports people. So we've been going out and talking to residents who have already been connected, and we've done a lot of work with the Old Fold residents who have been connected to try and understand what that process was like for them and how can it be enhanced. And we're looking to kind of develop something that can then be rolled out in the West Extension that Belinda mentioned to the residents being connected there to hopefully really kind of optimize this experience for people. My colleague Faye is going to be presenting this work in a poster back here. So if you're interested in more of that work, please check it out. But basically what I've tried to present today are three messages really about the importance of community engagement, using a variety of approaches and really trying to involve residents in that as much as possible. Because really these things are the key to acceptance, and also that we could really get residents involved and co-produce a customer journey or co-produce projects with them, which really increases their trust and buy-in. So my final slide, I'd just like to acknowledge my team, the partners that we've been working with, our funders, and again, the QR code for that paper if anybody's interested in checking that out. Thank you very much.